No early hours of February 14th, 1950, while most of the world slept unaware, the United States quietly crossed a line it would never publicly admit it had crossed, because somewhere above the dark, frozen waters off the coast of British Columbia, an American bomber carrying a fully assembled nuclear weapon slipped beyond human control, vanished into chaos, and forced the U.S. military to confront a terrifying reality for the very first time. A nuclear bomb was no longer guaranteed to be in American hands, and no one on Earth could say with certainty where it would end up. This was not wartime, not a battlefield, not an enemy strike. This was a training mission, a routine Cold War rehearsal meant to simulate the unthinkable, and yet within hours it became the unthinkable itself, marking the first official broken arrow incident in U.S. history, a term that sounds harmless until you understand what it truly means: the loss of a nuclear weapon. At the center of this incident was an aircraft few civilians today fully understand, an aircraft so massive and so ambitious that it symbolized America's belief that sheer technological power could overcome distance, weather, and even human limitation. The Convair B-36 Peacemaker was not merely a bomber, it was a statement. Designed during the final years of World War II and rushed into service at the dawn of the Cold War, the B-36 was built with a single purpose: to deliver nuclear destruction anywhere on Earth without refueling, to strike the Soviet Union directly from American soil, and to return home without ever needing foreign bases. With a wingspan longer than a football field, 6 massive piston engines mounted in a pusher configuration, and later supplemented by jet engines, the B-36 was the largest piston-engine combat aircraft ever flown, a flying fortress whose very existence was meant to deter war by promising annihilation. On that February night, one such aircraft, B-36, B, serial number 44-92075, lifted off from Eielson Air Force Base near Fairbanks, Alaska, under conditions that were already pushing the limits of both machine and crew. Temperatures on the ground hovered around -40 degrees, a level of cold so severe that mechanical failure was not a possibility, but an expectation. Engines could not be shut down without risking oil solidifying into sludge, metal contracting beyond tolerance, and systems freezing into uselessness. And yet, despite these dangers, the mission proceeded, because in 1950, urgency outweighed caution, and the pressure to perfect nuclear delivery systems overrode nearly every other concern. The flight itself was officially labeled a developmental training mission, a phrase that sounds innocuous until one considers what it truly involved. A full intercontinental flight profile, simulated attack procedures, real-world conditions, and most disturbingly, the presence of an actual Mark IV nuclear bomb in the aircraft's bomb bay. This was not a dummy weight made of concrete. This was not a hollow shell. This was a real nuclear weapon, carrying thousands of pounds of high explosives, electrical detonation systems, and uranium components. Everything required for a nuclear detonation except, officially, the plutonium core. And even that claim would later become a point of controversy, whispered doubt, and unanswered questions. The Mark IV bomb itself represented a dangerous transition in nuclear weapons design. Unlike the earlier Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki, which required meticulous manual assembly by highly trained technicians under controlled conditions, The Mark IV was designed for operational practicality. It incorporated internal batteries, monitoring systems, and electrical circuits that could be checked and controlled from inside the bomber. It was larger, heavier, and more complex, measuring over 10 feet long, weighing more than 10,000 pounds, and built to be handled routinely by air crews during long-range missions. Most chilling of all, it used a levitated pit design, meaning that its nuclear core could be stored separately in a container known as a bird cage and inserted into the weapon during flight, a procedure that, at the time, had never been performed outside of ground testing. 17 men were aboard the aircraft that night, including Captain Harold Barry, the aircraft commander, and a specialized weaponeer responsible for the bomb itself. Also present was Lieutenant Colonel Daniel McDonnell, acting in the role of bomb commander, a detail that would later fuel speculation about the true objectives of the mission. Official records remained vague. Goals were classified, test parameters were never fully disclosed, and yet, according to later testimony from crew members, this flight was meant to be as real as possible, short of actual war, a full-scale rehearsal for nuclear conflict against the Soviet Union. For several hours, the aircraft flew south along the Pacific coast, battling worsening weather, accumulating ice, and rising mechanical strain. Ice formed along the wings, increasing weight and disrupting airflow. Carburetors, mounted in an unusual forward-facing configuration due to the aircraft's pusher engines, were exposed directly to the freezing slipstream. Fuel mixtures became unstable. Engineers struggled to maintain proper balance. And then, one by one, engines began to fail. Not quietly, but violently. Flames erupted from multiple power plants, fed by unburned fuel-flooding exhaust systems that were never designed to handle such conditions. As fires spread and altitude dropped, the situation became unrecoverable. With half of the aircraft's engines compromised and the massive bomber losing lift, Captain Barry faced a decision that no training exercise could truly prepare a man for. The aircraft could not remain airborne. A crash was inevitable, and somewhere beneath them lay either the open Pacific Ocean, where survival was nearly impossible, or the rugged, mountainous wilderness of coastal British Columbia. But before any decision about the crew could be made, there remained the most dangerous problem of all, the nuclear weapon still aboard the aircraft. U.S. nuclear doctrine at the time was uncompromising. A nuclear bomb could not be allowed to fall intact into unknown territory, particularly during the height of Cold War paranoia, when even the possibility of Soviet recovery was considered unacceptable. And so, in a moment that would echo through decades of secrecy and speculation, the order was given to jettison the bomb. Over open water, at altitude, the Mark IV was released from the bomb bay, its internal timer set to trigger an airburst detonation. Crew members would later report seeing a flash in the darkness, a distant explosion illuminating the clouds below, while others saw nothing at all. No debris was recovered, no definitive proof was ever produced, only testimony and uncertainty. With the bomb gone, the crew prepared to abandon the aircraft. Parachutes were donned, alarm bells rang through the fuselage. One by one, men jumped into the black void below, descending into freezing rain, jagged terrain, and total darkness. 5 of them would never be seen again. The remaining 12 would eventually be rescued in what became one of the largest search and rescue operations in North American history, carried out largely by the Royal Canadian Air Force, a force that, at the time, was not even informed that a nuclear weapon had been involved. And then the aircraft itself, now empty, burning, and unmanned, disappeared into the night. At this point, the official story would later claim that the B-36 crashed into the Pacific Ocean, sinking into deep water, along with any remaining evidence of the weapon's fate. For 3 years, that explanation held. For 3 years, the incident was quietly filed away, classified, minimized, and forgotten by the public. But reality had not finished revealing itself. For 3 years after the disappearance of the B-36, the official narrative remained simple, almost comforting in its finality. The aircraft, the military claimed, had flown out over the Pacific and vanished into the depths of the ocean, taking with it the final evidence of what had gone wrong that night. The bomb had been jettisoned and destroyed. The crew had done their duty. The threat was over. And yet, beneath that carefully constructed explanation, uncomfortable details quietly refused to disappear. Pilots, engineers, and investigators who studied the case privately would later admit that something about the timeline, the geography, and the physics of the event simply did not add up. The bomber had been descending rapidly, crippled by fire and ice, its engines failing one by one. And yet, the wreckage did not surface. No debris washed ashore, no oil slick was found, nothing. For an aircraft of that size, with that much fuel and metal, total disappearance into open water without trace was statistically unlikely, but not impossible. At least, that is what the official record insisted. That narrative collapsed in 1953, when a Royal Canadian Air Force crew, searching for a missing civilian aircraft in the remote interior of British Columbia, spotted something impossible on the side of a snow-covered mountain. Embedded in the slope of Mount Colauget were the unmistakable remains of a massive bomber, twisted aluminum, fractured wings, and scorched wreckage frozen in place. The aircraft had not gone into the ocean. It had not vanished at sea. It had flown inland, deep into Canadian territory, and crashed at an altitude of roughly 6,000 feet. When the serial numbers were confirmed, there was no longer any doubt. This was B-36B, serial 44-92075, the same aircraft officially declared lost at sea 3 years earlier. The implications were immediate and disturbing. According to testimony given by the crew, the aircraft had been abandoned at approximately 3,000 to 5,000 feet while descending rapidly, barely able to remain airborne. Yet the wreckage was found thousands of feet higher than the altitude at which the crew had bailed out. This meant that after the crew exited, the aircraft somehow gained altitude, maintained controlled flight, altered course, and continued flying for a considerable distance before impacting the mountain. For this to happen, several conditions would have needed to occur simultaneously. A reduction in weight, sufficient engine power, stable aerodynamics, and a functioning control system. None of these were supposed to be available to a burning, ice-laden aircraft with half its engines destroyed. One explanation offered was mechanical and impersonal. After the crew abandoned the aircraft and the bomb had been jettisoned, a massive amount of weight was removed from the airframe. Ice that had accumulated on the wings at higher altitude may have shed as the aircraft descended into warmer air. With less weight and reduced drag, the remaining engines, now freed from fuel imbalance, could have produced enough thrust to stabilize the aircraft. The autopilot, set before the final evacuation, may have continued flying the plane on a heading that no one fully understood. In this version of events, the B-36 became a ghost aircraft, flying itself into the Canadian wilderness until gravity finally reclaimed it. But there was another theory, one never officially endorsed, yet quietly discussed among investigators for decades. A theory centered on a single man who no one could confirm had ever left the aircraft. Captain Theodore Schreier, the mission's weaponeer, was among the last aboard the plane. Multiple crew members later admitted that no one saw him jump. No parachute was recovered. No body was ever found. And unlike the other missing crew members, whose deaths were attributed to exposure after bailout, Schreier's fate remained uniquely ambiguous. He was a trained pilot. He understood the aircraft. He understood the bomb. And if, for any reason, the bomb had not been fully destroyed, if some component remained aboard, then there would have been only one motivation strong enough to compel a man to stay behind: preventing a nuclear weapon from crashing uncontrolled into foreign territory. Yet when American recovery teams finally reached the crash site in 1954, after multiple failed attempts, they found no trace of the bomb. No casing, no fragments, no identifiable components. The wreckage was methodically stripped of sensitive equipment, photographed, and then deliberately destroyed with explosives. Portions of the fuselage were melted by controlled fires. What remained was left to be reclaimed by snow, ice, and time. Locals who assisted the expedition were reportedly sworn to secrecy, and for decades, the exact location of the crash was kept from the public. Whatever answers the mountain held were buried intentionally. As for the Mark IV bomb itself, the official position has never changed. The United States maintains that the weapon did not contain a plutonium core, that the explosion witnessed by crew members was the detonation of conventional high explosives, and that no nuclear contamination occurred. Subsequent radiation surveys conducted at the crash site decades later found no abnormal readings, a fact often cited as proof that no nuclear material was ever present in the aircraft at the time of impact. And yet, this assurance rests entirely on documentation, testimony, and records controlled by the same institution responsible for the mission, the secrecy, and the aftermath. Physical evidence, the one thing that could definitively close the case, was never recovered. In 1997, when a fisherman off the coast of British Columbia claimed to have discovered a large metallic object on the seafloor, shaped and sized in a way disturbingly consistent with a nuclear weapon casing, public interest briefly reignited. Government agencies investigated, then dismissed the claim. The object, they said, was unrelated. The location did not match the flight path. The matter was closed. But for many historians and aviation experts, the larger question was never whether that specific object was the bomb. It was whether the full truth of the incident had ever been told at all. The loss of B-3644-92075 was officially recorded as the first broken arrow incident in American history. Since then, more than 30 similar incidents have been acknowledged, involving lost bombs, crashed aircraft, sunken submarines, and missing nuclear components scattered across the globe. Some were recovered, some were partially recovered, and some, according to official records, were simply never found. Each case adds weight to a sobering reality of the Cold War era. Nuclear weapons were moved, tested, flown, and stored at a pace that often outstripped humanity's ability to control the risks involved. Tonight, somewhere between the mountains of British Columbia and the cold waters of the Pacific, the full story of America's first lost nuclear weapon remains unresolved. Perhaps the bomb was destroyed exactly as claimed, its remnants scattered harmlessly into the sea. Or perhaps fragments still rest in silence, undiscovered, corroding slowly beneath water or earth. What is certain is that on that February night in 1950, the United States came closer than it ever intended to losing control of its most dangerous creation, and that the answers to what truly happened were buried not by time alone, but by choice. Because some weapons are too powerful to lose, and some truths are too unsettling to fully reveal.